I'm excited to have both of you guys on, and I don't want to make any assumptions. I'm sure many are going to know your name or faces, but before we get into it, I think we're bringing Jody on the cash side and then Jason on the installation side, and a little bit of this merge between Canada and the United States. So before I really start picking your brains, maybe we'll start with Jody. You can explain a little bit of where you come from and Quest and accomplishments in the market and so forth.
Sure. I won't try and tell the whole story in a bio, but I did make some notes to sort of go deep back 3 generations into like the 50s and 60s to try to explain the origin of window wall. But I do come from a third generation of cash family window people up in Canada, up in Toronto. And up here, we've been doing this type of window for a long time, and it really started to accelerate to be something that could perhaps come to the US around the evolution of our latest system around 2009, 2007, 8, 9. And that's, I'll let Jason sort of take it from there.
Yeah, afternoon. I'm with Advanced Window, title is President of Advanced Window. We're a typical glazer. We've partnered with Quest in around 2010 with a great bypass product that really helps springboard Advanced Window. But we are at heart a solutions center for multifamily construction and commercial construction. So we are in charge of the West Coast, company called WIS as well, as part of our group. So my role is managing the installation companies and partnering with vendors in addition to selling to manufacturers that are part of the Quest Advanced Window family.
And part of what we've spoken about before is that I wasn't really keen on the Quest system before coming across you, Jason, and really diving into the DC market. But when I went there for the first, not DC, but when I went there with an eye for facades about 5 years ago, and I said, wait a minute, I'm seeing a lot of this, and I'm seeing a lot of the same contractor doing it. So something must be clicking here. But I'm sure you've installed other window walls before in the past. So before we get into kind of Canada versus USA and different system types, did you do a lot of window wall work? And I go across the country and you have very different opinions, and some markets love it, some markets hate it.
I think window wall in general is an undefined term. So it depends on, we have always done window wall, meaning we've always spanned slab to slab and ran widths of windows. Our earlier jobs were a lot of field molding, a lot of stack molds, and we still do things like that when that's where the budget takes the product to. But when I think window wall in a real unitized system, it's a company that can not just glaze a window, but put auxiliary materials in it, give you a unitized wall with finished back pans insulation and a true unitized window wall, as opposed to a glazing system only that's captured glazing with vertical and horizontal mullions and maybe a glazed in panel. So that's one of the biggest differences between, we'll call it Canadian window wall, and a lot of what we're seeing at U.S. manufacturers who don't get as creative with the infills, and you have to go more to the unitized curtain wall guys to see some of that in the U.S.
Well, it's also such a labor-intensive product with exterior, interior access, and all the ceilings or ceiling around your perimeter receptors. That do you think it's really kind of also contingent on either the labor pool or labor rates in the specific market?
I think the most manufacturers in the U.S. are very diversified. So to dedicate your resources to the amount of labor intense it is to truly unitize a product, I think that's the biggest difference. And so the companies that I know of who are doing unitization, whether curtain wall or window wall, they're typically only making that product or different variations of that product with different lines and different infills, and that's their focus. So I think it's more of a business model than it is labor.
From what you've seen, Jody, do you think Canada is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of the USA in terms of window wall unitization technology, means and methods of designing? I think people put this Canadian window wall tier above our domestic traditional window wall that you'd see with your heavy sub-sills stacking from the interior and then having to hang from the exterior.
I don't even think you necessarily need to characterize it as head. I think it's a driving force. It is the predominant type of wall in the Canadian cities, and with the help of AWI and Western markets we've been in, we've had some serious success in becoming a predominant type. For example, in DC, and I think it's hyper focused. So I think it is what it is. I don't know that it's necessarily better. You could have some really beautiful wall types that cost more money. It really depends what your focus is. I don't want to sit on here and slam on other window technologies, but it's definitely very hyper focused in what it does in mass quantity. Okay, so I mean, we've toured for years. We tour potential American clients through Toronto, and we'd show a bunch of stuff on paper. and we get some skepticism, some receptive clients, and they say, yeah, but where is this done? And we'd say, please fly up to Toronto and see what we've got going on. 200 plus cranes a year, just pumping out 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 stories right now of window wall. Come up and see it. It's widely used, right? And I think that's the biggest difference, is that we're an incubator of this type of technology and hyper focused.
Is it the same methodology that they use in Vancouver?
Yeah, with the exception of adapting these types of systems for a seismic application, yes.
So I'll tell you what's interesting about what Jody's saying. Those early days when we were bringing architects up to Canada because we didn't have enough in the US to tour, we had some that would come up and not be happy with the skylines. They were driving around Toronto saying everything's the same, everything's redundant. But that's what has driven the window market in Canada, is that redundancy. They haven't had to deal with a lot of articulations and ornamental and a lot more challenges that we deal with in the US market. Those markets have been focused on volume and redundancy and simplicity.
Is it lack of a palette from the architectural community, or just lack of contractors or suppliers that are able to fulfill that type of work?
I mean, we saw a run from 2001 till sort of mid 22 that was unprecedented. Really didn't have a blip for 08 in Canada. And it was, I think, owner developer driven or market driven as to, what the markets would respond to and what the market would pick up and buy. And it didn't drive a whole lot. There's not a history like DC. When I came to see Jason in DC, a few times, DC started to make sense to me. Oh, architects have been getting their ornaments here for 200 plus years. We just don't have that culture of ornamentation. Even our capital region in Ottawa isn't as, grand, and Canada's a tenth of the size of the US. The capital region is not a tenth of the size of the square footage of the US government in DC, right? There's a grandiose nature of DC that I came to understand, why architects are used to getting their ornamentation. Same goes New York, right?
Very similar patterns in New York.
Well, yes, I go to some secondary markets and you have 4 or 5 window types on a 45-story building, where here 45-story building is going to have 387 window types, because if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. But in terms of now, let's kind of veer into this, what we call a hybrid unitized system, to differentiate between window wall and curtain wall. Frankly, I don't really care what somebody calls it. I think that it's how the system performs, how it installs, and if it meets the design intent. But how do people bucket this system? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it a compromise? How do people view it?
Well, I think that it depends how in the know they are of its application. Like when it's foreign to them, there's one sort of general perspective. When it's more common to them, like, I think sometimes it's important to ask people who repeated on it. We have I think big supporters, and I think I passed a paper to you from Morrison Marshall. We helped them with some source material, author a little piece on Canadian window wall and its adoption in the US. I think when you ask groups like that, building science groups who've been through it and been through both, they kind of appreciate the slab edge position, the waterproofing details of how the slab is covered, how difficult of a water column that is to overcome, because the seam is in line with bottom of slab and it takes a lot to sort of come up and sneak up to the critical seal. In 07 through 09, we rebuilt everything to be rain screen, both in each module and in the general application of the system to the building. So it's air sealed and weeped and pressure equalized and drained. I think that once people get used to that and they're forced to comment on that approach versus, let's say, a curtain wall completely sitting outside the building, in the context of multifamily residential, in the context of like the building we're looking at behind Jason's head, where on the left corner there's a flyby and a balcony slab and a few things happening where the window system's asked to not only be in front of the slab, but step up onto the slab. Those transitions are sort of long figured out in this incubator of the greater Toronto area in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And when we come up with a fully pressure equalized system in the 2010 zone, we're learning from that history of proven ways of doing things in waterproofing that I think if you ask some objective folks, they prefer in the context of multifamily residential.
There is an education needed, because I can come across some of the most intelligent building envelope consultants out there who have never seen a bypass detail before, and they're offended by what they're looking at. It's not a warm response. It's 1,000 questions, most of them believing you've drawn a unicorn that doesn't actually exist because they've never seen it before. So it's definitely that. For the developer side too, like how they see it, they see it as a fast product that can be installed from interior. So when you show them what you can do, and that's all the growth that we've seen is you do 1, 3 more come. Not many systems can wrap a building without being on the exterior with a rain screen waterproofing, without depending on static caulk joints, and do it at a floor a week. So it's you have to be educated, but if we can execute on it and show you what's possible, the reaction becomes very positive. And it starts to drive the architects to say, designed to make the system work versus us trying to chase a system we can't do out of the limitations of a bypass window wall. So it's experience helps a lot.
How critical is schedule? And I'm sure that's a very blanket statement, but I am in my neighborhood watching a bypass high-rise project go up. I think I've told you who's doing it before, and it's right next to the grocery store. So every time I gotta drive my wife there, she's like, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. And I'm like, look at that. Did you see how fast it went up? And she was like, holy shit. And she couldn't believe it. And so in a 60-story high rise, though, if your interior program is only on floor 17, what does it matter that they're dried in on floor 49? At what point do they just can't keep up, and that accelerated pace doesn't really mean very much?
Well, I don't think that might be the case on one building, but we're not in this for one building. So, when we hook up with somebody for the second building and they realize the advantages they could have planned for in their first building, but they weren't believers, then we can really fly. Then you can really start to double up their crews and really get ahead of it. And we've dealt with quite a number of Canadian developers doing work, like for example, down the west coast of the US. They already know that innately, right? And others watch them and they're like, how are they performing at that pace? And they start to examine, and you see people change companies. So that knowledge spreads around pretty quick, whether it's, adjacent to a Canadian developer who proved it in a marketplace like Seattle and everybody was watching, or it's someone like Jason doing the first one and wowing everybody and everybody talking on building 2 how to take advantage of that.
I mean, I saw it happen in DC. We for one of the first ones we did, floor week, we were 5-6 floors ahead of the interior framer. There was not a huge catch up, but like the building behind me is 2 towers we're doing right now, and it's with the general contractor we've done. It's probably our 7th or 8th tower with, and so they're creating. Okay, we're going to put a temp roof on this floor. We're going to have it right in here, and then they're contracting the framers and their MEP on the schedule they know that they're going to hit. So it's all about the upfront. We've had jobs where we've gone fast and then you just sat there and spent weeks trying to catch up and there's no gain, but that's never happens twice.
But so there are some gains, Jason, because if you look at the way like window walls waterproof versus a curtain wall with a gap, is if we can close in the whole building and there's every 100 days a vicious rainstorm, which seems to be more and more common, we're gonna prevent the building from getting that like cascading damage, even if they're behind on finishes, right? But generally by the second time we've done business together, the team figures out a way to capitalize on it.
And we fly.
How do you, especially in your early days before you guys entered into this marriage, when you sold your product at the material price and Jason held the install and markup and just the full contract value, how accurate were you with your labor component? I'm sure Jody's like, this is how quick you can move, this is how many men, this is how many panels a day, but you were probably skeptical. Now you're probably real tight and efficient. But where was that disconnect initially?
We were definitely working with our installers to convince them how fast it could go, because it's not the kind of system, if you haven't installed it before, that you look at and go, yeah, that's easy. So it was definitely an early onset where budgets we thought we could hit didn't happen. It was never an amount that made us stop gambling on the next one with the same budgets. It was always things that we looked at and said, okay, we know why that happened. We can solve that. Now our crews, they get excited for any quest, any quest jobs that are window wall. And the same guys that loved punch windows 10 years ago dread the punch windows. Because when you're not dealing with a framer and rough openings that are wrong and waterproofers in front of you, when you're just concrete and post shores and you control the outside of the building and you know what you're doing, you start to move real fast and make some good money. And so it took, again, education is everything, but it didn't take long to get there.
So as Jason took to it, as we met a lot on, being risk averse and planning things out on how it's going to go in DC, right away we saw tips and tricks and advantages from Jason being so focused on making all his money on the install that he became, at parts or at a lot better at install than we were. And we sort of, teacher became the student became the teacher. And we started to look at some of the methodology. And with, if I fast forward all the way to the acquisition, I mean, that's a big part of what we thought about when we acquired was being turnkey in the US markets and looking at the standards we had at AWI WIS and across the Quest installation team in Canada and amalgamating that to one best practices standard of installation. So we learned a lot from Jason's team as well.
And on the contrary, Jody, what have you learned from selling to the wrong installers in the past? How has that bitten you? And, how did that evolve your approach over time?
I mean, in Canada, we're turnkey, so we were always on top of it. We watched in the early 2000s some of our Canadian competitors come to New York and other markets, and in some cases be party to lawsuits that were things I could publicly search on Google. And I think it revealed to me how critical it is to have an approved installer who's looking at a long-term partnership. Jason was quite young in 2010, had his whole life ahead of him, and it seemed like a great match. And we were careful. I think we were both skeptical of each other, and we were extremely careful. I think that benefited us, and we stepped into it. So luckily, I don't have those examples to speak to. We have a similar relationship on the West Coast with the business we acquired, WIS, and we were able to avoid any of those major pitfalls to sort of learn from our competitors' mistakes.
So from a performance standpoint, you're very confident, it sounds like, from air, water, and waterproofing standpoint. Where are you running into barriers regarding thermal? I'm sure in your Texas job, it's not an issue, but is that a hindrance in Canada at the moment? And do you see that bleeding down into your Boston, Seattle's, and cooling dominated climates?
Yeah, we're not in Florida. We don't have an impact window as it stands right now. I don't know how big of a gap it is for us to do that testing, but it's not something we're focused on. We were well ahead. I mean, when we made a 38 millimeter strut in 2009 and took some big improvements to the thermals of the frame and just the way the frame is oriented with a sort of central thermal break, we were leaps ahead. We were 20-30% ahead for many, many years. And I would say that Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and to a certain extent Toronto and New York and DC behind them has sort of caught up to that. So we've made all of our next round of improvements inside the infills, inside the operable vents, the swing doors, the sliding doors, all things that we manufacture. And right now we've got the acquisition by our parent company of BV Glazing, who had some stuff on the book. So we've developed some next gen systems, and we're working right now, and that's a big part of my focus right now is the sort of the system that will be out 2 years from now that really takes it to another level on thermals. Now, it's probably a third of all the cities we deal with that are really challenging us on that. So it's not the majority focus, but we absolutely have to have a product that goes and achieves those values.
It's also an interesting time, like tying your thermal question and your schedule question together. The time matters most, except for apparently when the economy's down, because lots of people are making choices right now to cold form frame, sheathing, punched openings, buying overseas vinyl windows, and spaces where unitized window walls, curtain walls would be a better choice and save months on construction. But right, so we're in a weird spot where it's how much do you invest into the next thermally improved unitized system today? What's the timing to do it? There is an appetite for it. It's going to come back again. There's going to be a lot of buildings out there that regret their choices. And I don't think that what we're seeing in today's construction world, which is kind of a reversal of the desire for unitized products, I don't think that sticks. I think that's economically driven. And there are still the higher end projects that still want the unitized systems. But jobs that are trying to scrape by, get finances, value engineer, where it's the timing is very questionable at the moment. But it wouldn't be a big leap for Jody and his team to get there. It's about
I
timing.
think we tend to meet as we get to do business with repeat customers. We get to meet higher and higher level of the companies that we deal with, and we poke them and quiz them with a lot of questions. And I think we understand what makes them tick. And I think what makes them tick in a good market is that utilization of their capital. Is they've got some equity in a deal. They're able to really easily get financing, which is not the case right now. And us enabling a quicker turn means better utilization of their capital. And when they build 2, 3, 4, 1,000 unit, 1,500 units a year as an apartment builder, and we do one for them on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, that's incredibly important. But Jason's right, in this sort of more constrained financing environment, other things take priority right now. So we're just we're waiting for
And there's very few projects that are window wall that we're not thermally appropriate for now. So we've seen a handful in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. side. Boston has the passive house growing, but I haven't seen passive house apply to the high rise market.
So the resolution when anybody says a curtain wall or window wall is too high of a window to wall ratio is just infill it with something else. I mean, it's a pretty bit easy thing to overcome. Like we're looking at in the back, insulated metal panel,
your framing,
whatever.
your framing is your framing. There's a lot of improvement you can do to your framing to stop the thermal transmittance there, and then your infills are the same infills anyone else could have, as well as the wall construction behind that. So I think what you're seeing is like to comply in general, not just with our system, you're seeing a reduced vision glass ratio to comply.
And the buildings behind me, the one directly behind is unitized, and the one kind of peeking out on the side, that's a punch window. And they're putting, I believe, stone terracotta, something on the cold form framing. And that wasn't a financial choice, that was a design choice. But we can still use the window wall to stack vertically between those punch windows at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, what stuck with me, I think we spoke last week or 2 weeks ago, is you said no one's paying the extra $5 a square foot to get the buck glazed look, which is fine. That's not the world we live in today. But when every project, unless you're talking about the 1% where it's an exception, like your West Coast job, which I don't know if you want to or don't want to mention, that's that type of project's an anomaly. So how do you stay hyper focused right now and determine what's worth pursuing?
Well, I think there's a lot of, especially with the two companies coming together, with BV and Quest coming together, there's a lot of sort of SSG or frameless or buckless designs on the shelf that none of them really deliver on the holy grail of being the exact same price as the window wall we sell. So there's a time and place for that. I mean, in history of our last big run, we didn't lose too many jobs over that topic of silicone glazed. I think most of our work in the US is for rental builders. At most times we wind up with a custodian, with some sort of staff that knows how to change glass or make small repairs. And the fact that we're glazed from inside on the vision glass becomes really important. That if there is a unit that gets cracked from inside, or from a swing stage blowing around outside, it can be replaced from inside. So I think that, when an owner's faced with that decision of what kind of building do I want, and they're faced with that decision of aesthetics versus practicality of maintenance, we see them, historically they've chose, 90 something % of the time to go with the window wall.
But what opportunities we chase, Adrian, that's an even harder question in a down market, because the answer is you chase all of them. Right? Anything that has life in this market and you have a solution for and you're confident you can execute on, we're going after it. The estimating side of the business is busier than it's ever been. And we were going after project types we wouldn't go after in the busy market, because we don't want to fail and our resources are too busy doing larger stuff. So right now, whatever we think we have a solution for and we're confident, we will go after, whether that's with our products or with external products.
So it's interesting. You can give sort of an unbiased answer here, but in terms of like unitized solution on the left versus what we're looking on the right, whether it's like a dense glass sheathing type of metal panel on a track, and then your infill glazing with punch windows, or however they're going to do that sort of in situ traditional stick build methodology. I don't know how accurate or efficient it is, but how does a GC or CM like accurately weigh those two options from an estimation standpoint, other than just putting you as a line item? Quest is option A, this guy's option B, dollar for dollar, meaning it's just not an apples to apples comparison. So how do you really get through to an owner to say, like, here's where the real savings are?
Well, one of the questions I like to ask, and I don't, if any of the ACM guys in DC are listening or anywhere else, sorry, but well, you are one of them. Is I like to ask, and the more vertical it is, I think the more important the answer is. The number of stories is okay. On your last tower that you did the model on the right, how long did you expect the ACM to take, or whatever the system is, the EFA system, and how long did it take? And if you're in a booming market, how many capable trades with how many people working in each of those companies are out there versus what we confidently know, and you can call any of our references, we know we can put those panels, into our system, unitize them, and stand up the building. No one's crawling on the outside afterwards. So I think that's the first way to try to shift the mentality. I think it comes back to doing one for that group and them seeing the advantages themselves right in front of their face and strategizing for the next tower, how to take advantage of those things, because it's just really hard as a line item to compel someone and convince them the quantity of time and what the time's worth.
And on the estimating side, the answer is menus. The answer is a lot of communication. And when we first, and we still do this now, but it was a lot more in the earlier days when we were not being drawn into buildings. We looked at projects that had ACM and glass and said, that's a great project to unitize it. So we would give a unitized quote. The actual dollar difference between a cold form metal frame wall sheathing air barrier ACM versus unitized window wall, they're very close to each other, within $5 a square foot, sometimes even depending on the market.
In your market, yeah.
The challenge is most estimators that are working for the general contractors don't quite understand the concept of what you're offering them. And so if you just give them a lump sum price that has all the metal panel included in the window wall, and they're still carrying the cold form framing and building all these knee walls on the other side of their budget, then your pricing will never be looked at twice. So it's a lot of color coding and explaining and making sure who you're submitting it to. If you're going to take the effort to bid the job and offer that solution, then you have to go the extra step and make sure, almost to an annoying degree, that they understand your price is not valid unless they're looking at the other side of the coin. The only thing that changes that equation when we're not even is when the metal panel gets very deep, when there's big articulation, when there's lots of bends and tucks and returns. Then you're now negotiating what the max panel shapes and sizes can be on top of the stud work and everything else. So on a simple flat ACM project, as long as the GC understands what you're providing them, you can submit that bid if you explain it properly.
Does the GC have to be on board in terms of programming their entire interior schedule, how many facade superintendents they have, how they map out, meaning there's all these secondary and tertiary benefits that come down the line with the unitized approach. But if they don't factor that in, then they're probably not actualizing the real savings or benefits.
And I don't think most ever will. I think them dropping their contingencies and general conditions never happens. At best, you get a contractor willing to give a contingency to the developer that they have to pick up on the back end. But in the early estimating side, not many GCs, unless it's someone we've done 6-7 buildings for, they're real hungry and they're real confident. They tend to try and pass those general conditions and not give that benefit out too early.
Early on, when you were really before you got on your uptrend in DC, how much of your time was spent with the general contractors versus the design community? Did you have to get GC on board to then say design team work with Jason, or were you educating the design team?
It was 90% general contractor.
Yeah, and owner, developer, general contractor together were the most receptive, right?
And then they'd crowbar us into the design teams to say, we like this budget, we like this concept. Let's go into the details, and then you start that process. So that probably time-wise, 60%, 40% architect, 60% GC developer. But that 40% was brought on by the GC developer telling them to give us the time for the most part.
And is that the same thing today? And I guess as the installation side, do you feel you're confident enough on the manufacturing side that you can explain all the constraints, the design performance criteria, and then steer them in that direction?
Definitely. And we have certain architectural firms that like to lean on us, and they know that we'll provide the drafting support. And we're not a company that's out there marketing. You're not going to see us show up in a lot of magazines or anything like that. Trade shows, we attend them for the company. We don't exhibit at them. Our marketing fees is that time, that drafting time that architect calls and, hey, we'll draft it for you. Just give us a call and we'll help you. That's the buildup. And you don't win all of them. You end up just like any marketing campaign. There's a 10% success rate and 90% is expenditures. So that is what we do. And that's why we've had success with the design. A lot of architectural firms really appreciate what we can do for them and give them, whether it's Revit or CAD or sample details back and forth. And then because we're connected to Quest the way we are, we know the limitations. So we don't let it get too far down the road with an idea that's not going to work, or that the manufacturer comes back and says we can't do that. Like we have
no, but there's been countless small tweaks. Like I think it goes from maybe initially being crowbarred, as Jason said, in some of those rooms, to trying to repair any damage that was incurred by really listening to what the architect's vision is, what the designer's vision is, and then trying to come up with the small tweaks that we can do in a mass production system to achieve some or all of what they're looking for. And I think we know the ones we've truly connected with appreciate what we're doing under the constraints that we're doing it. And some of those things become standard offerings. We innovate. DC had probably, like going back to the earlier comment, asked for more ornamentation than elsewhere. And some things that we came up with Jason, we got really good at making them, and we make them regularly now.
And from your standpoint, are you indifferent if you're manufacturing a BV system versus a Quest system? And Jason, from the installation front, does your heart lie in one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, we focused, like the two businesses were very different. The Quest business, going into like our sale in 2017 to the parent company, was somewhere around 60% US, probably grew as big as 70% US. BV system was 80 to 90% Canadian, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Halifax. So different focus. Some of the ornamentation and solutions we're talking about, BV didn't have the number of American jobs to be exposed to. Some of the mass production techniques that BV had did higher volumes of higher and taller towers in Toronto and Vancouver. So different skill sets. Really nice to have a bit of both right now. So we're still focusing the Quest brand in a lot of the US markets that are already familiar with the Quest brand, and not really competing against ourselves.
It also makes it easy with tariffs to say, we make Quest out of Texas, and we could make BV out of Texas too. And their unitized curtain wall, we will be making out of Texas because of the tariffs. But there's no reason to set up a second window wall line at the moment in our Texas facility, and therefore we shouldn't really be selling BV in the US because we're gonna have to pay the tariffs, whatever they might be on the given day. So it's been a very organic choice to say, let's just keep Quest in the markets that Quest is in, and then offerings that Quest doesn't make, like the unitized curtain wall and the railings that BV makes out of Niagara, we can start making out of Texas and bring those into all our markets and not be competing with ourselves.
So being local in Texas and obviously being a little bit more competitive from a freight standpoint and so forth, how realistic do you think it is to say in a 3 to 5 year period in Atlanta and in Texas, some of these very cheap labor rate markets are going to turn into unitized towns?
Everywhere else, I mean, even high end, low unitized rates where we've had the right anchor projects to demonstrate the speed of the system with people, who are employed at these general contractors who stay in town, and there's been some serious stickiness. So I think that our first major tower in Dallas, the Turtle Creek Phase Two, with Hanover, who's been our client elsewhere in San Diego and other locations, is a good one. It's a good one to tour people through. It's sizable. I think it's what 28 stories, something like that, Jason.
And we're installing our first Houston job as we speak. We started about 3 days ago on called Hotel Derrick, or the Greenlee Hotel, that is being full demo of the exterior. We're wrapping it with window wall from bottom to top. So it's a curtain wall turned to window wall project. And it's in the heart of Houston. So I think we'll get a lot of attention there, and they'll see how fast it goes. We put in the first floor in 4 days. So we're putting on a show there at the moment, and hopefully we can keep putting on a show, because that's what brings the business in.
I don't mean to go down a little bit of the rabbit hole in terms of building typology and where it fits well. When you see a design that just has a lot of compartmentalization and balconies and just atypical conditions, does that turn you off? Do you try to steer it a little bit more into more consistency across the elevation, or you don't fight that fight and you offer what you can offer?
There's
Depends how
small
busy we
fights,
are.
and there's small fights too, like window walls really well suited to end at bottom of slab. It's not well suited to go a couple inches below bottom of slab. So we've developed some panels over time that we can cheat a little bit, a few inches. But when an architect's drawn an 18-inch band and 6 inches of it is below the slab, the top of window wall panel needs to anchor to structure. So we're redlining things. We're redlining long horizontal panels that are a feature of the system and saying they need to be unitized to be part of each module. So there's those small things that the architects who work with us a lot get used to.
If we see something that's heavy articulation, 18-inch panels, 12-inch panels, that's where our advantage as glazers come into play. So we can offer a request price, and it's going to be less than it's going to be for an 18-inch panel, and say, here's your 3-inch panel, and here's our price. Here is your base price, which is whether it's window wall or curtain wall in between, and then an ACM price where they're showing ACM. So we can be flexible. We're not going to try and crowbar it too badly. We may, in a busy market, we may look away from the ACM, focus on the windows, because that ACM is a harder scope. It's a lot more project management. But in this, when we're not busy, we'll go after all those scopes and offer both.
Let's say you see a rendering, a schematic design, and you're like, that's never getting built in this market. So, you let them go through a few iterations and you wait till it's really turned into maybe a later stage DD. I'm sure the answer is we'd love to get in early. We'd love to work with the owner and help them from day one. But sometimes are you just like, I'm not going to fight that fight when it's ready to actually get designed and built? That's when we'll come in.
Yeah, and I think the response to that is, give $1 per square foot. Don't take the 40 hours to take off and detailing, but look at the building and say, I think you could do it for this with this kind of system, and see where that goes.
I think also we've seen examples where it's not a grid like what's behind the building behind Jason's head. There's a feature, and the feature is 12, 18 inches. Because we're the window manufacturer, because we're an ACM contractor and AWI, we are comfortable with putting it on the face of windows. So we're comfortable with kind of having your cake and eating it too. Wrapping the floor, wrapping the facade, making sure that the mullions of the modules that are behind the ACM can handle the weight we've engineered for the ACM system. So then the ACM system can come along. We can penetrate the front surface because everything's back sealed. So as long as we provide adequate stiffeners and things in our frame, we can hang ACM 12, 18 inches deep by us, by others, off the front of our system.
Are there any materials that you don't want to handle? Meaning, I worked on a BB job where they did a porcelain tile. Sometimes I see more GFRC integrated into unitized curtain wall now. Is there any material they say and just red flag goes off in your head?
I think, Jason and I have entertained a few bids on sort of 20 millimeter, 3/4 terracotta, 3/4 1-inch GFRC. It starts to get sort of too heavy for the maximum reinforcement of the window wall, and doesn't really beg for, being a continuous wrap anymore. You start to go, it makes a lot more sense to put stud behind those really heavy elements. So I think there's some sweet spot, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 12, 15 pounds a square foot max elements that we want to hang on the window wall.
In made proper size too. Like, we're asked for thin brick. I've been asked for thin brick many times on window wall. There's too many attachment points. You can't, when you start to figure out, you have your jambs, your head, your sill, you have a 4x8 frame, and you have a hollow middle. And so if you can take a piece of 6 mil stone that's 4x8 and attach it with a clip system, that's different than trying to figure out terracotta, which doesn't come 4x8. It's way too heavy. You have a lot of different midpoints to try and connect to. And then you're saying, okay, how much steel do I have to put across the actual frame of the window? Clips coming off the steel. You end up with too much expense. So even
I've seen a ton of architectural precast too in DC. I think your projects where You're just going up with Arbor and Croce or whoever. So in that type of circumstance, it's like we can't touch it. We just need to work alongside that contractor.
And we encourage them in future designs to focus deep things like that where people could see it. You know, on podiums or just above where an amenity deck is, but on a 40-story tower, how perceptible is the 12 or 18-inch deep elements? So we've sort of been moderately successful in sort of convince people of that and gather more scope up tall towers.
And we focus on how we can attach to it. I mean, precast, if we can't replace it, we got to figure out how to work with it. And so the 1900 Crystal next to the airport at Cook Fox project we had a challenge there of how to integrate and how to get the waterproofing detail that Clark Construction wanted to see. And so we came up with some accessories. We didn't change the window wall, we changed the attachment methodology. And we've used that now in several projects and with Carosi, because he does most of the precast around here. But it's get our embeds in the right place and go, and then it goes back to speed again. So if you're coordinated with them and you can move, everybody's happy at the end.
To your earlier question on where we're challenged on U values, like we have, or thermals in general, I have a building going up in Toronto with a BV system going in, and there's so much U value or improved thermal through these donut shaped precast panels that are just huge. They're just huge with spray foam or whatever's in them to get to a huge R value. Same thing. It's just about adapting. We've always been a heavy precast market in Toronto, not so much a GFRC market, traditional precast. And we've always had different anchorage details to every combination of detail that we've ever seen in our library up in Toronto. And now we're seeing we saw the market kind of move away from it for a long time and sort of come back to it because it could be a very efficient wall, right? So we play nice with precast.
Adrian, I have a question for you.
Oh,
I know you've been successful in the precast world and working with Unitized and precast and thermals. I mean, I don't know much about the advantages of precast versus cold form and stone. So what leads you in that path?
Aside from me personally, I think why architects like it: articulation, materiality, depth, the shadowing. It's pretty cost effective relative to other materials. If you can get a simulated stone or terracotta instead of true terracotta, or even inlay those materials within the precast. In terms of unitization, same principles. You're either going to sit there and hang a bunch of column covers and spandrels and column covers, or you can find a way to horizontally panelize it, anchor it at column locations. But same type of challenges with cell. The owner has to buy into it. GC has to buy into it. It's usually an owner-led cell. And if architects see the benefits or the cost savings, then they can really play with some of that shape and materiality. But you can go down a design rabbit hole and you just know it's never going to get built that way.
Very true.
So very good conversation. Other than Turtle Creek, where can people see some of this work here in the USA?
The DC market, DC, Virginia, Maryland. We have a great tower we finished in Nashville. We have one in Dallas. We talked about LA, San Diego, Seattle. We're finishing a job in Eugene, Oregon right now. Jody, where am I missing? A couple in Denver, Chicago.
Yeah, San Diego and LA, we just put together a presentation for a revised presentation. We've got 16 monumental towers in the last 6 years in LA and San Diego. We did the job going back a while, Jason, in Brooklyn. We did the job in
we have 9 towers in New York.
Yeah.
An advanced window is now installing in New York, and we're pursuing work actively. Quest has 9 towers under their belt. Margaritaville Hotel
in New York.
In New York.
Wow.
Yeah, Margaritaville, Victoria Theater. Those are 2 monumental ones. The Victoria Theater was right next to the Apollo in Harlem. It's the only high rise that went up, I think, and they said 40 years at the time. So
cool view, very cool view on the north end of the park, looking south. Very, very different view than you're used to seeing in New York.
Good. We need some good competition in New York.
We finished 3rd Ave in the Bronx recently with Artemis. What's the other ones, Jody?
That 3rd Ave is called the Motto, I think is the marketing name.
Gowanus, we just finished one there too. So we're East Coast, West Coast, and we're trying to close the gaps.
Good. Yeah. Thanks again, guys.
All right,
Okay. Thanks, Adrian.
Bye.